Welcome everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with Michael Kitces. So I want to talk today about valuations of advisory firms because I'm hearing a lot of buzz coming about DoL Fiduciary and some advisors, frankly saying they might be throwing in the towel and what that does to valuations of advisory firms. So we had a study from Fidelity recently that said as many as 20% of advisors could leave once the DoL Fiduciary rule hits. Rick Edelman was out saying he thinks as many as half of the advisors could leave over the next 10 years, driven at least in large part by DoL Fiduciary. And so it's kicked off this fear that there's going to be a wave of selling and that all of this selling activity could drive down valuations for advisory firms, right? Because we're all trained in mechanics of markets. Too many people trying to sell an asset at the same time, sellers overwhelm the buyers, tends to drive the price down. But I'm actually really not convinced that DoL Fiduciary and kind of its aftermath is actually a serious threat to advisory firm valuations. And in fact, I suspect what we're going to find are a lot of advisory firms actually get more valuable after DoL Fiduciary, not less valuable. And here's why. So one of the driving forces of the DoL Fiduciary rule is that it puts pressure on upfront compensation that potentially leads to conflicted recommendations, right? That's the whole focus of this best interest contract. If you want to still get conflicted commission compensation, the firm needs to conform to the best interest contract exemption, then implement all the required policies and procedures and compliance obligations to validate that they're still giving best interest advice for reasonable compensation with no misleading statements, despite the fact that they happen to be receiving commissions. And the alternative, kind of the easy button that the Department of Labor gave for regulatory purposes is, or you can just become a level fee fiduciary, shift away from commissions altogether, and just focus on level AUM fees or retainer fees, and you have a much easier compliance obligation to move forward under DoL Fiduciary. So most RAs are choosing to become level fee fiduciaries, and as I kind of predicted in discussions earlier this year, we're seeing broker-dealers actually split. So some, like LPL, are choosing the full best interest contract route and will still have commission-based retirement accounts. Others, like Commonwealth and even Merrill Lynch, are shifting to become level fee fiduciaries and just doing open assets under management for all retirement accounts. And so those in the commission-based business have expressed a lot of nervousness about this forced switch from commissions to level fees and the pressure that it puts on their businesses. But here's the irony. When you actually look at the transaction prices for AUM fee businesses versus commission-based businesses, the AUM fees are worth more. A lot more. The going rate for an AUM firm is about 2 times trailing gross revenue. Larger firms that are highly profitable sometimes get even more. By contrast, the typical commission-based firm struggles to get 1 times trailing revenue in many cases, and large firms, sometimes actually including broker-dealer entities themselves, they can't even get that much. Broker-dealers, many would be happy to actually get 1 times trailing revenue. They're hoping to just get 0.7 or 0.8 times revenue. So in other words, if a commission-based firm can shift its revenue from commissions to recurring AUM fees and just make the exact same revenue, on average, the business is twice as valuable. So that's not a DoL Fiduciary valuation disaster. That's a DoL Fiduciary valuation gift. That's regulators forcing advisors into businesses that are actually more valuable in the long run. Now, of course, the caveat is that making the transition from getting all compensation up front to one that has levelized compensation with AUM fees can be a tough transition if you do it all at once. So if you're an advisor that used to bring in $10 million in new business and earn 5% commissions, that paid you $500,000 of gross revenue. With a 1% AUM fee on that same business, it's $100,000 of revenue instead of $500,000. Now, cumulatively over a decade, the 1% fee may generate more revenue. It has the potential to grow as the portfolio grows. You don't have to go back to clients and sell them new things. You simply have to serve them well. But from the revenue perspective, it does mean there's a near-term hit that you have to go through to convert clients over time until eventually you've cumulatively added so many AUM clients that it adds up to more revenue in the long run. Which means at a minimum, there is still real work for commission-based advisors to do to shift to become more fee-based or to go entirely level fee fiduciary. And I'm sure that's part of why a lot of advisors are saying that they're going to leave. Because the reality is, if you were approaching retirement already and you don't have a planned 5 to 10 years left in your career, frankly, it may not be that desirable to do this rebuilding process and this whole shift. And frankly, if you don't have CFP marks or some training to give valuable ongoing advice for ongoing value, you may even have trouble converting your clients to an AUM or retainer model, because they're going to ask, well, what advice are you going to give me on an ongoing basis? And if you don't necessarily have a good answer, that may be a tough transition. And I suspect that's why probably those who are most oriented towards pure sales and the least oriented towards advice are the most likely to leave. And frankly, that's what we see in other countries as well. When the UK shifted its what are called RDR regulations, retail distribution review, and eliminated commissions, they saw about 20 to 25% of their advisors leave, and it was mostly the most sales-oriented folks that weren't really giving that much advice. Australia seems to have seen a similar phenomenon when they banned commissions 3 years ago. So if you're that sales oriented, you may really decide it's just easier to sell the business, walk away, go sell some other product in another industry than try to be a salesperson running a business that has no upfront sales commissions, because you're running a level fee fiduciary business in the advisor world. So even though the regulations are forcing advisors towards a more valuable business model, I get it that not everyone's going to make the transition, and that means there probably will be some uptick in advisors that are selling their practices. Some may even walk away, but ideally you still want to sell it. Now, the fact that there's a potential uptick of advisory firm sellers still kind of brings us back to that question about whether we could have a near-term glut of sellers, even if AUM firms are ultimately more profitable. Could there be a near-term wave of selling that drives down valuation multiples? And I still don't see that as likely to happen. And the reason is that I think we still underestimate how much pent-up buying demand there actually still is. So the popular statistic from FP Transitions, which is a marketplace that matches advisory firm buyers and sellers, is that they're finding there are about 50 buyers for every seller right now. So a massive imbalance of way more people that want to buy than firms that actually want to sell. But the truth, when you dig in the numbers, it's not even just that there's a 50-to-1 buyer to seller ratio. It's that the buyers tend to be larger established firms, many of which are serial acquirers with the capital to do multiple transactions. A lot of those buyers actually do multiple transactions year after year, while the bulk of the selling firms are solo firms, or at least we'll call them smaller independent firms that have a couple of advisors. It may be a very valuable business worth a couple $1 million, but much smaller than the ones that are worth tens of millions of dollars that are doing multiple serial acquisitions. But here's what that means. If the number of buyers to sellers is 50-to-1, but the buyers are all ready to buy 5 apiece, the actual imbalance, when you look at it based on the capital to buy versus the number of firms to sell, I mean, we could be off 100-to-1, 200-to-1 or more. There are some very deep pockets out there still looking to buy advisory firms. Frankly, there's so much capital now coming into the advisory industry to buy firms. It's leading to an uptick in large RIAs selling. It's leading to new private capital coming in just to buy large RIAs. The capital is finding so much trouble buying large RIAs. They're giving money to large RIAs to buy smaller RIAs in what's now called the sub-acquisition market, because basically there's so much capital out there to buy advisory firms. The people with the capital need other advisory firms to help them use their money to buy more advisory firms. There's that much buying power pushing through the advisory industry right now, which means, simply put, even if there's a big increase in the number of sellers, it looks like there's more than enough capacity to handle the transition into DoL Fiduciary. Now, it's still important to recognize that selling a largely commission-based firm in the face of the DoL fiduciary rules is not going to get a great valuation. Now, that's not because of the wave of sellers. That's because you're running a commission-based model that struggles to sell for one-times revenue already, and that one-times revenue is going to be even less valuable when DoL fiduciary is making it harder to execute the old commission-based business model. In fact, frankly, I suspect one of the primary buyers of commission-based businesses will be AUM firms that are hoping to buy clients up at commission-based valuation multiples and double their money by turning those clients into AUM fees. Because again, there's that much buying power out there for advisory firms running the AUM model. Now, I think it's worth noting there is one piece from DoL Fiduciary that may ultimately compress valuation a bit, kind of an indirect effect to the DoL Fiduciary. It's the fact that when so many of us as advisors all get forced towards the AUM model all at once, it's going to take this thing that I call our crisis of differentiation, where it seems like we're all doing financial planning and wealth management with AUM model and providing holistic services. If you thought it was bad before because so many advisors were doing the same thing, it's about to get a whole lot worse. if you think it's hard to distinguish from other AUM firms now, wait until another 100,000 advisors are forced to do what you do as a fee-based advisor. Or if you're a commission-based advisor and you're about to do this transition, good luck differentiating your new level fee fiduciary service from all the other RIAs out there that have been doing it for years. And I think we're seeing part of the effect of this already. It's driving firms to reinvest more into what they do, up the ante for their advisors, deepen their services. And we're seeing that now in the benchmarking studies, because what's happening is all the reinvestments into the firm is causing a hit to profits. So when we look over the past couple of years, all this discussion about whether robo-advisors are going to compress AUM fees, but what we're actually seeing is the AUM fees are steady, but profits are getting squeezed because firms are putting more money into the firm to do more for their clients to justify the AUM fees that they're charging. And that margin compression could ultimately bring down valuations of firms a bit, because the industry likes to throw around this 2 times revenue number. The truth at the end of the day is any competent buyer really doesn't value businesses based on revenue. They value it based on profits and cash flows. Now, when most firms have similar profits and cash flows off of the same revenue, the kind of rule of thumb multiple of revenue happens to be a pretty decent estimate. But because at the end of the day, it's really based on profits and cash flows, and if profits and cash flows could get squeezed by the competitive landscape as we all get forced into a similar AUM model and then struggle to differentiate ourselves, we might make a little bit less, which means maybe successful advisory firms will run 25 to 30% profit margins, they'll run 20 to 25% profit margins, and that can cause valuations to come in a bit. But still, that's really not actually caused by DoL Fiduciary. That's caused by competition and too many advisors trying to do the same AUM model for the same wealthy clients at the same time, doing the same services. Maybe DoL Fiduciary is a catalyst for that because it's going to drive even more advisors towards the same model at the same time, but it's not the cause. But in any event, to this broader question of whether DoL Fiduciary is going to cause advisory firm valuation multiples to crash, I just don't see it. If you're in a commission-based business, you're not going to get a great multiple if you sell at this point. But the truth is you weren't going to get a great multiple before either. You'll get something. There are buyers. If you convert to an AUM fee model and you can actually make the transition, frankly, you can expand and improve the valuation of the business. It may be a few lean years in the transition, but it's actually way more valuable, twice as valuable on the other end. And for those who do want to sell, there's still way more buying capacity than potential sellers, even if there's a wave of sellers, because it's not just the 50 to 1 buyer to seller ratio, it's probably the more like 200 to 1 buying capital to available value of firm selling differential. Huge amount of buying potential out there, which means ultimately, I just don't see this valuation crash coming. I mean, there may be some pressure on margins in the long run, because we're a maturing industry with growing larger firms. And that may squeeze valuations a little bit. But on the flip side, if 20% of advisors leave or more, if Rick Edelman is right, that means more of clients available for those of us who survive and thrive, which means our businesses may be so much larger by then, you won't actually care if the valuation multiples are slightly compressed because your firm's going to be so much larger, because that's what happens when you're a survivor that serves your clients well. So I hope that helps as just some food for thought around future of advisory firm valuations and where things are going in the next couple of years. This is Office Hours with Michael Kitces, 1 p.m. East Coast time on Tuesdays. Thanks for hanging out, everyone, and have a great day.